So Ronnie has asked me just to try and put this all together as a and make it relevant for neurological disease. So I made a few points that I thought are critical in terms of the of making it appropriate to neurological disease. What is the most useless test to predict acute respiratory failure in neuromuscular disease? It's the arterial blood gas. Of all the tests you could do when you walk up to a patient who's going into respiratory failure from a neuromuscular disease, the most useless way to predict that they need ventilation or not, and when they do, is the arterial blood gas. It can be completely normal 1 or 2 minutes before respiratory arrest, because the patient may just manage to breathe enough to keep the CO2 down and maintain his oxygenation. Much more valuable would be to measure his vital capacity, or to ask him to cough, simply to cough and clear secretions and see how much breath he can take in and whether he can clear his secretions. The second point is generally oxygen therapy is needed in some patients, but oxygen, like any other drug, too much is as bad as too little. Patients with neuromuscular disease generally, until they run into complications, don't have problems with their lungs and gas exchange. It's a mechanical thing. So if they need oxygen therapy in neuromuscular disease, they need ventilatory support, not oxygen therapy. And the worst thing you can do to a patient with ALS or myasthenia or myopathy that's running into trouble is prescribe oxygen therapy. And the pulmonologists are particularly bad at this. They will easily send a patient home on oxygen therapy because the saturation is low. But they should say to themselves that this is a neurological patient. There is nothing wrong with his lungs. Oxygen is dangerous in such cases and will only bring them to the point that they have a cardiorespiratory arrest and hypoxic brain injury. And unfortunately, the chronic ventilatory centers in Israel are full of patients with hypoxic brain injury because of this. Supplementary oxygen will only encourage rapid shallow breathing and atelectasis in the bases while it maintains the saturation. You have to expand those bases, not give oxygen. What are the signs of imminent respiratory collapse in neuromuscular disease? These are they. Abdominal muscle paradox, accessory muscle use, difficulty in clearing secretions when you ask him to cough, rapid shallow breathing, stopping during speech to take a breath, sweating, weak cough. People with neuromuscular disease run into respiratory failure by rapid, shallow breathing. They move down the curve of tidal volume to rate, and they develop rapid, shallow breathing. If you monitor them and their respiratory rate is increased, they're on the way to the rapid, shallow breathing respiratory failure. One thing I've learned over many years, and particularly today when Stephen Hawkins died last night, patients with ALS, when I was a medical student, was clear they would be dead in 6 months to 2 years, and it was a terminal disease. Today I have many patients, some of them famous like Stephen Hawkins, who because of early ventilatory support, maintained their brain function 100% for many, many, many years. If you intervene early in ALS or in myopathy, you can keep the patient alive, safe, and very often quite happy with their quality of life for many, many, many years. Ari Rockach and I are dealing with a brother and sister right now in Bet Shemesh. Bet Shemesh, or where are they? No, in Monatziv in Jerusalem. 30 years on a ventilator, working every day, going to work on their car on HT50 ventilators that we developed 30 years ago. 30 years. Not coming to hospital, not needing antibiotics more often than a normal person, and safe and happy on their machines. And ALS cases, there are a few very famous ones. If the patient is developing rapid shallow breathing, recognize it and intervene. If the vital capacity is less than 15 moles per kilogram and they can't cough, recognize it and intervene. If the cough is ineffective, recognize it and intervene. If you want to be scientific, you do a positive expiratory force measurement, and if it's going below 35, you're running into trouble. The question is what to do early on. I'm convinced that if we recognize in myopathy, ALS, Guillain-Barré, that they're starting to desaturate at night and starting to be getting rapid shallow breathing, if we intervene early, you dramatically alter the natural history of that disease, both in morbidity and mortality in the short term and the long term. I don't want to do too much about non-invasive versus invasive ventilation, but it's very, very pertinent to the neurological case because Ari is going to do that after the break. So I'm going to go very, very quickly through this because he's going to focus on it. Non-invasive and invasive ventilation refers not to the mode of ventilation, it refers to the interface. That's all. Because you can give pressure support ventilation with a nose mask or face mask. It refers to the interface, not the mode. Non-invasive positive pressure ventilation and non-invasive negative pressure ventilation refers only to the interface. Non-invasive are CPAP, BiPAP, bi-level, assist control, pressure support, interfaces are nose, mouth, hood, laryngeal mask. And here's some examples. Negative non-invasive ventilation refers to continuous negative, intermittent negative, biphasic, with an iron lung, with a jacket, or with a cuirass. All available and in use. We have a choice. Do we blow or do we suck? Everybody's got their preferences, what they prefer. Ari will discuss how you initiate non-invasive ventilation and how you apply it. I don't want to do that and what the contraindications and what the predictive factors are. I don't want to do it. But I just want to state again that if you intervene early by non-invasive or invasive, you can dramatically alter the course of the disease. Here's a lady from South Africa, actually a young girl who was obese, was falling asleep at school, not able to continue with her work. She was an obesity hyperventilation syndrome with a central alveolar hyperventilation. She wasn't coping at school. She was gaining weight. We brought her into our unit. Sigal will remember many years ago, we put on negative pressure ventilation, and she flew. She lost weight. She went back to work, to school, and she started doing excellently, just because of intervening in a patient with a tendency to alveolar hyperventilation for a neurological cause. I have many cases now with early ALS and myopathy on nocturnal support. During the day when they're standing or sitting in their wheelchairs, they manage quite well. It's when they lie down and the diaphragm goes up and they're a little bit big tummy, they have difficulty and they start to desaturate, they start to raise CO2, and the wrong thing to do is to send them home with oxygen. They need some support. Also, some people don't want the support. We've had a few cases of people developing ALS who do not want the support. But it's very difficult when they're getting drowsy and sleepy and their CO2 is up and they're desaturating to be able to have an intellectual, academic, medico-legal discussion with them about what's right and wrong. And we've done it. We've put the patients on non-invasive ventilation with negative pressure, positive pressure, brought in the medico-legal team, and have their power of attorney or their pre-terminal autonomic medico-legal document signed about what they want, and then we know where we stand. Most patients with neuromuscular disease don't have the privilege of a pre-pathology medical directive, advanced medical directive. And they land up against their will on ventilators, or they have their hypoxic event and their hypoxic brain injury in the family. Everybody doesn't know what they wanted. The country is full of patients like this on ventilators that the families say, and we've published it, Sigal particularly has published on what the family and the patient's feeling is about chronic ventilation in terminal diseases like that, and it varies. It should be documented before. And neurologists are the key people on these cases to recognize those early diagnoses and to help the patient get to a decision on autonomy of what they want in the future. One of the classical cases, the famous Dr. Malamed Cohen, and with the passing of Stephen Hawking, in my opinion, he's the world #1 example of how you should conduct your life when you have a terminal disease and you need support. 18 years ago, or maybe 19 years ago, 20 years ago, came to our unit, came into the unit in Miyun, hypoxic, near death. One of our chief neurologists who became very famous in promoting letting the patient go, said he hasn't got a future, let him go, he's got a terminal disease, he's going to be dead anyway within a few months. He said, and his family said, he wants to live. His family said, he told us he wants to live. We intubated him, did bronchoscopy, cleaned out his messed lung. He's still living today, going for 19 years, at his home in Rehavia in Jerusalem, writing books, publishing pictures that he draws with his eyes and his eye technology. Dr. Malamed Cohen, you could look at his website. He has a fantastic website. He's written the most beautiful books from the Tanakh. He's got the most moving book on women in the Bible where he's drawn pictures of them and he's taken excerpts from the Tanakh, and he's doing it every day. He's just published another book. He's just published a romantic novel, which I'm reading. This is a guy who was dead. He was actually dead in the Miyun, with everybody not wanting to do anything until his family pushed us and we did bronchoscopy and we saved his life in our medical ICU. Sigal was there, and we sent him home more than 18 years ago. This is one of the publications that Sigal did on critical care in 2005 about utilizing non-invasive ventilation for patient autonomy. A whole lot of cases with specific diseases that we gave them the benefit of the doubt by putting them on non-invasive ventilation, supporting them so they could make a decision on what they want to do with their terminal neurological illness. We owe it to our patients to do this. Here's a picture of myself with Malamed Cohen. I'm very, very proud to have been associated with this man for basically all the time that I've been in Israel. That's his website, www.malamed.org. Have a look. It's fantastic. I think I should stop because we're running out of time. Ronnie asked me to keep it brief, but there's plenty of data in the literature of non-invasive ventilation in diseases like ALS and myopathy and the benefits of doing it. Read the literature, make the diagnosis early, give the patient the benefit of the doubt with autonomy, and give them a chance. Early tracheostomy, use the speech valve where you can during the day so that they can maintain their quality of life. Give them nocturnal ventilation if needed, and support them with non-invasive wherever possible. And just finally, I talk to you about modes of ventilation. I state firmly here that I believe completely that the future of mechanical ventilation is automated ventilation. We cannot cope with the demands all over the world, and particularly in Israel, of more and more people going onto ventilators and less people knowing how to work them properly. Do you know that there's much more cases today outside of ICUs and high care units on ventilators than there are inside ICU? When I was a student, there was not a single person that was ventilated outside of the intensive care. Now I've got, and Ari's got hundreds of patients in Israel on ventilators at home. Hundreds. And in the chronic ventilatory centers, there are thousands. And the people that I have to work with them, the nurses and the doctors, many retired doctors, things who never had proper expertise in ventilation or running these cases, we have to give them automated ventilation and change to, instead of a physician, technologist-driven ventilation, to a patient-driven ventilation. So the patient decides what he wants and has an automated ventilator that delivers him what he wants. The machines are out. The literature is there. We will not find enough nurses. We need an adaptive ventilator. Here's one of the examples. And it works like an autopilot. The machine measures the patient's lung function and delivers the ventilation. I want to tell you a funny story. When I made Aliyah to Israel 20 years ago, I was asked by the Good Tipul Nimratz to give a lecture on ventilation. And I stood up and I told them, I'm finished, last minute, I'm getting the sign. I told everybody that I was in South Africa and I was working with a Hamilton company in Switzerland, and we developed a new idea of automated ventilation, adaptive ventilation. And I got up and I gave the lecture 20 years ago. And two people, I won't mention their names, very prominent physicians here, stood up from one of the university hospitals and said, "How dare you?" And I said, "What?" They said, "How dare you come from an apartheid country like South Africa and come and give a lecture to us clever Israelis about how to ventilate person and come up with science fiction? Don't you know there's students in the audience? And the students are being affected by what you said. And the students are going to think that this is the future." And I said, all I'm telling you is about the research I did, and what I believe, David Linton believes, is the future of ventilation. Here's my prototype. Here's the research I did. It's being published. Here's the publication. It's unacceptable. You shouldn't do it. We do peer review. We read what's in the literature first, and then we introduce. I said, okay. I walked in a few years ago to the same intensive care unit run by this guy that stood up. And all the machines were Hamilton machines with adaptive ventilation. Every single one in his unit. I rest my case. Thank you very much.